You know, when we think about the huge wars of the 20th century, our minds usually jump to battlefields, soldiers, and all those shifting borders on a map. But the biggest consequences, they weren't always loud explosions. Nope, they were these quiet revolutions that completely reshaped our society, redrew the lines of gender and work, and honestly changed the fabric of American life forever.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Back in 1919, an economist named John Maynard Keynes gave this really chilling warning. He looked at the Treaty of Versailles and basically said, hey, the crazy high reparations you're putting on Germany, this is going to be a total catastrophe. And boy, was he right. It just goes to show you, the aftershocks of war, they ripple out in ways nobody can ever fully see coming. Because while all the big-shot economists and politicians were arguing about money and borders, a totally different kind of revolution was starting up, right inside America's factories and homes. An economic problem was about to light the fuse on a social explosion, one that would challenge everything people thought they knew about a woman's place in the world. And it all really kicks off with World War I. When the U.S. jumped into the fight, millions of men shipped out overseas. At the very same time, the stream of immigrant labor pretty much dried up. Well, this created a massive labor shortage, right when factories needed to ramp up production for the war machine. So, what did they do? Where did the factories turn? To women. The government, along with groups like the YWCA, launched these huge propaganda campaigns. I mean, look at this poster. It wasn't just asking for help. It was totally reframing factory work as a patriotic duty, a second line of defense. A door just swung wide open.
And women answered that call for a whole bunch of reasons. Let's be real. A huge draw was the money. These factory jobs paid way more than traditional women's work, like being a maid or a clerk. But it was also about dignity, right? A chance to get some respect instead of being someone's servant. And of course, you can't forget that powerful feeling of patriotism.
Now, what's super interesting here is who these first-wave workers were. For the most part, they were young and they were single. And even with all those powerful posters, the actual change was pretty modest, just a 6.3% bump in women working. So this was a really important first step, for sure, but it wasn't a floodgate. Not yet anyway.
Of course, these new jobs came with some serious old problems. Women had to deal with a lot of hostility from male coworkers who felt threatened. They were flat out denied equal pay for equal work. I mean, you had factories refusing to pay them the same as guys doing the exact same polishing job. And the days were brutal, 10 hours long, until the women organized and fought back with strikes, finally winning shorter hours.
And this right here, this is a huge moment. All that struggle led the government to create the Committee on Women in Industry. Now, it was just an advisory group, so it didn't have a lot of legal teeth. But the fact that it even existed was a landmark moment. It was the government finally admitting, okay, this new workforce is real and it needs to be acknowledged.
So, fast forward about 20 years, and the world is at war again. And this time, everything that got started in World War I, it's not just going to continue. It is going to absolutely explode on a scale that makes that first wave look tiny.
I mean, you can just see the difference right here. On the left, you've got the World War I poster calling for a woman worker for every fighter. But look at the right. The women of World War II are presented so differently. They're strong, they're confident, they are soldiers without guns. The scale of what was needed had just gotten immense. And here is the number that just says it all. 6.5 million. That's how many women flooded into the American workforce during World War II. In just 5 years, the percentage of working women leaped from 25% all the way to 36%. This wasn't a small wave anymore. This was a tidal force. So where did all these millions of new workers come from? This is the crucial difference. Unlike World War I, this new army of labor came from what they called the untapped workforce, married women, and a lot of them were mothers. This was a massive break from how society thought things should be, and it was driven by patriotism and the simple need to provide for their families. Now, the common idea at the time was that these Rosie the Riveters were just temporary, right? That they'd be happy to go back home once the war was over. But the data tells a completely different story. A survey in 1945 found that a whopping 75% of them wanted to keep their jobs. They loved the new independence, the friends they made, and yeah, of course, the paycheck. But that's not what happened. Not even close. As millions of soldiers came home looking for jobs, the women in the factories suddenly found themselves fighting a new kind of war. The very same country that called them heroes now basically wanted them to pack up and go home quietly. So, how did companies handle this? Well, they came up with some very interesting language. At places like Ford, When a woman left her job, it was officially called a voluntary quit. But you have to ask yourself, how voluntary was it really?
Yeah, those voluntary quits were pretty much engineered. The playbook was almost the same as after World War I, just on a much bigger scale. Bosses would give women impossible workloads, put them on crazy shifts that made childcare impossible. Or, and this is the ironic part, they'd use old regulations that were meant to protect women to get them fired from jobs that were suddenly labeled too strenuous.
And this push out of the factory floor was backed up by a huge cultural shift. The brand new toy of television became this super powerful tool for selling the 1950s ideal of the perfect suburban family. I mean, shows like I Love Lucy constantly showed female characters as sweet and funny, but ultimately kind of incompetent, reinforcing this idea that a woman's real place was in the home.
So it's really easy to look at all this and think, wow, one step forward, two steps back, right? But that's not the whole picture. The experiences of women in these two wars planted seeds that, even with the post-war pushback, would eventually grow into the modern women's movement.
Let's just connect the dots real quick. That little advisory committee from WWI, it became the Permanent Women's Bureau in 1920. And even though millions of women got pushed out of their jobs in 1945, the memory of being capable and earning their own money, that didn't just disappear. So when a new, much more radical women's movement kicked off in the 60s, it had these organizations and the shared history to build on. And by the 1980s, the world had changed for good.
So here is the big takeaway. The wars were a crucible. It wasn't a straight line of progress. Women were pulled into the workforce when they were needed and then pushed right back out. But the experience they gained, the skills they learned, and the organizations they built during all that hardship, that became the essential foundation for everything that came after.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to chew on. The world wars blew the factory doors wide open out of pure necessity. But as we've just seen, opening a door is one thing. Fighting to keep it open for the next generation, well, that's a whole other battle.